I never expected that a simple act of kindness would change my entire life. There I was, finishing my maintenance shift at the university, my back aching from a long day of fixing things other people broke. The bus stop was empty, except for her, this woman who looked completely out of place with her designer coat and sharp, confident features. When the bus arrived and I saw the panic flash across her face, something told me to help. Those last few dollars in my pocket were meant for tomorrow's lunch, but I offered them without thinking twice. The way she looked at me, first with surprise, then genuine gratitude, stuck with me long after the bus pulled away. How could I possibly know she was Rebecca Hayes, the brilliant CEO of Hayes Corporation, a woman who commanded boardrooms and made million-dollar decisions daily? I certainly never imagined she would track me down, or that she would become so fixated on repaying a simple kindness. What started as a coffee to say thank you quickly became something neither of us expected, a connection that challenged everything about our separate worlds. Her corporate colleagues sneered at my worn work clothes and calloused hands. My friends warned me that someone from her world would never truly accept someone like me. Yet something kept pulling us together, despite the impossible barriers between us. This is the story of how I offered my last dollars to a stranded woman at the bus stop, never knowing she was the CEO who would change my life forever. Buckle up, get ready, and subscribe for a special surprise tomorrow. Rebecca Hayes silenced the boardroom with a single raised finger. The tension that had been building for the last 40 minutes instantly dissolved as 12 pairs of eyes focused on her. She never raised her voice. She didn't need to. Gentlemen, we've reviewed the projections from 3 different angles. The acquisition makes sense financially, strategically, and culturally. She closed her laptop with a soft click. Unless someone has identified a risk factor we haven't discussed, I believe we're done here. No one spoke. Rebecca allowed the silence to linger exactly 4 seconds, long enough to give space for dissent, but not so long as to invite unnecessary debate. She had mastered these subtleties years ago. Excellent. I'll have the legal team prepare the final documents for signing next week. She stood, smoothing the invisible wrinkles from her tailored suit. Thank you for your time. The board members gathered their belongings, some lingering to exchange pleasantries or schedule follow-up meetings. Rebecca maintained her practiced smile, warm enough to seem approachable, reserved enough to command respect. As the room emptied, she felt the familiar post-meeting relief wash over her. Another successful navigation through the treacherous waters of corporate politics. Her assistant, Michael, appeared at her elbow with her schedule for the remainder of the day. You're 3 o'clock canceled, so you have a 90-minute window before the investor call. The quarterly reports are on your desk for review before then. Perfect. I'll use the time to work on my presentation for the tech summit next week. Hold my calls unless it's urgent. Michael nodded and disappeared. Efficient as always. Rebecca gathered her materials and made her way to her corner office, heels clicking rhythmically against the marble floors. The glass walls of Hayes Corporation's executive floor offered a panoramic view of the city below, her city in many ways. At 30, she had built this company from the ground up, transforming it from a promising startup to a billion-dollar enterprise that employed thousands. Settling behind her desk, Rebecca opened the quarterly reports and began methodically reviewing the numbers. The financial health of the company was strong, as expected. She had assembled a team of the industry's brightest minds and most skilled operators. Their success was a reflection of her vision and leadership. Hours passed as Rebecca worked through her afternoon tasks with characteristic precision. She did not notice the darkening sky outside her window until a rumble of thunder drew her attention away from her laptop. A storm was moving in, sheets of rain now lashing against the glass. Checking her watch, Rebecca was surprised to find it was nearly 9 in the evening. The executive floor was silent. Even Michael had gone home. She gathered her belongings, mentally calculating how long it would take her car service to navigate rush hour traffic in this weather. As she rode the elevator down to the lobby, Rebecca scrolled through emails on her phone. A notification appeared, informing her that her device was at 5% battery. She frowned, remembering that she had left her charger at home that morning. No matter, the ride wouldn't be long. The lobby was empty except for the night security guard, who nodded respectfully as she passed. Outside, the rain was coming down in torrents. Rebecca opened her luxury ride app to summon her usual car service, only to watch as her phone screen went black. Dead battery. Perfect timing, she muttered, reaching into her handbag for her backup portable charger. It wasn't there. Further searching revealed an even more alarming discovery. Her wallet was missing. Rebecca closed her eyes, suddenly remembering that she had switched handbags that morning and must have left her wallet in the other one. No phone, no wallet, no car service. Rebecca Hayes, CEO of Hayes Corporation, stood stranded in the pouring rain. For a moment, she considered returning to the office to use a landline, but without her access card, she couldn't re-enter the building after hours. The temporary relocation of their offices to this part of the city, necessitated by renovations at their main headquarters, meant she was in an unfamiliar neighborhood with few transportation options. Rebecca spotted a bus stop across the street and made a decision. She would take public transportation home and sort this out there. How hard could it be? She navigated billion-dollar deals daily. Surely she could manage a simple bus ride. As she crossed the street, the rain soaking through her designer coat and blurring her vision, Rebecca maintained her composure. This was merely an inconvenience, a minor disruption to her carefully ordered world. She had no way of knowing that this moment, this perfect storm of circumstances, would set in motion events that would challenge everything she thought she knew about success, connection, and herself. The bus stop offered little protection from the relentless downpour. Rebecca stood beneath the small shelter, water dripping from her hair and expensive coat. Two other people huddled there as well, carefully maintaining their distance from one another. A bedraggled teenager with headphones and an elderly woman clutching a plastic shopping bag. Rebecca attempted to wring water from her sleeve discreetly, maintaining the dignified composure expected of someone in her position, even when no one was watching. The irony wasn't lost on her. Just hours ago, she had finalized a multi-million-dollar acquisition, and now she couldn't even afford bus fare. She glanced at her dead phone again, pressing the power button futilely, as if sheer determination might resurrect it. Nothing. The temporary Hayes Corporation offices in this part of the city had seemed like a minor inconvenience during the headquarters renovation, but now the unfamiliar location left her genuinely disoriented. A distant rumble grew louder, the bus approaching. Rebecca felt a flicker of panic. She hadn't taken public transportation in years. How much did it cost? Did they take credit cards? Not that it mattered, since her wallet was sitting uselessly in her other handbag at home. The headlight beams cut through the rain as the bus pulled to a stop, doors hissing open. The teenager and elderly woman boarded quickly. Rebecca remained frozen, weighing her options. She could walk, but home was miles away in this unfamiliar district, and the storm showed no signs of relenting. She could wait for the rain to stop, but that could take hours, and the thought of standing at this grimy bus stop all night was unthinkable. Another figure hurried toward the bus stop, a man in work clothes, slightly out of breath. He nodded politely to Rebecca as he passed her, heading straight for the bus. "Last call," the driver announced impatiently. Rebecca made her decision. Swallowing her pride, she approached the man who had just arrived. "Excuse me," she said, her voice carefully modulated to sound confident, yet appropriately humbled. "I've forgotten my wallet. Would you happen to have enough to cover my fare as well? I can pay you back." The man turned, raindrops clinging to his dark hair, surprise evident in his expression. He studied her briefly, taking in her designer clothes, her composed demeanor so out of place in this setting. "Where you headed?" he asked. Rebecca named her neighborhood, an affluent area across town. "That's 3 zones," he said, $4.50 each way. The bus driver cleared his throat pointedly. "Coming or not? I've got a schedule to keep." The man reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn wallet. Rebecca watched as he counted out bills. Not many remained. He handed a $10 bill to the driver. 2 fares to Westbrook Heights, he said. You don't need to, Rebecca began, but he shook his head. It's fine. Weather's too bad to be stuck out here. They boarded together, finding seats in the nearly empty bus. Rebecca settled uncomfortably on the hard plastic seat, acutely aware of the wet, squeaking sound her expensive shoes made against the rubber-matted floor. Thank you, she said, turning to her unexpected benefactor. I appreciate your help. I'm Rebecca Hayes. Marcus Johnson? He replied with a slight nod. His hands were calloused, she noticed, with traces of what looked like paint or plaster dust under his fingernails. I'll pay you back, she insisted. I can get your contact information. Don't worry about it, Marcus said, looking out at the rain-streaked window. Just helping out. Rebecca wasn't accustomed to accepting help without clear terms for repayment. Every interaction in her world had defined expectations and outcomes. This simple act of generosity with no apparent strings attached felt foreign, almost suspicious. I insist, she said, her CEO voice slipping out automatically. Marcus turned to her, a hint of amusement in his eyes. Okay, if it makes you feel better, but it's really not a big deal. An uncomfortable silence fell between them. Rebecca found herself studying Marcus covertly. His clothes were worn but clean, work boots, durable pants with various stains, a navy jacket with some kind of institutional logo partially visible. His hands told the story of someone who worked with them daily, strong, capable, marked by labor, so different from the manicured executives she surrounded herself with. The bus lurched forward, windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against the torrent. Rebecca gripped the metal handrail, unaccustomed to the jerky movement. Storm's getting worse, Marcus commented. Been working late? Yes, Rebecca replied, not elaborating on the board meeting or acquisition. You as well? Maintenance emergency at the university. Broken pipe in the science building, he explained. Got it fixed, but took longer than expected. Rebecca nodded, uncertain how to continue a conversation with someone whose daily reality was so removed from her own. In her world, she would have already established common connections, mutual acquaintances, or overlapping business interests within the first minute of introduction. Those familiar pathways weren't available here. As the bus wound its way through the rain-slicked streets, Rebecca found herself acutely aware of her vulnerability. No phone, no wallet, no car service at her beck and call. Just the kindness of a stranger who had offered his last dollars without hesitation, even though she was clearly not from his world. For the first time in years, Rebecca Hayes, CEO of Hayes Corporation, felt something unexpected. A genuine connection with someone who wanted absolutely nothing from her. The sensation was both discomforting and strangely liberating, like stepping onto unknown terrain after a lifetime of carefully mapped paths. The bus rumbled through the storm-darkened streets, wipers fighting against the downpour. Despite her damp clothes and the unfamiliar setting, Rebecca maintained her composure, sitting straight-backed on the hard plastic seat. Marcus sat beside her, seemingly comfortable with the silence that had fallen between them. This is my stop coming up, Marcus said, as the bus approached an intersection lined with modest apartment buildings. You've got about 15 more minutes to Westbrook Heights. Rebecca nodded, suddenly aware that her unexpected savior would soon be gone. Thank you again for your help. Most people wouldn't have done that for a stranger. Marcus shrugged. Most people would do the same if they could. Sometimes we just need to see the need, you know. The simplicity of his statement caught Rebecca off guard. In her world, decisions were calculated, benefits weighed against costs, favors recorded for future leverage. This spontaneous generosity didn't fit her understanding of how the world worked. Still, I appreciate it, she said, reaching into her coat pocket and retrieving a business card that had escaped the fate of her wallet. Please take this. I'd really like to repay you. Marcus accepted the card, glancing at it briefly before tucking it into his jacket. If he recognized the name of her company or her position, he didn't show it. The bus slowed to a stop, and he stood. "Hope you get home safe," he said with a small nod. "Weather's supposed to clear by morning." Rebecca watched as Marcus exited the bus, pulling his collar up against the rain as he jogged toward a nearby building. The doors closed, and the bus pulled away, continuing its journey through the storm. She found herself staring at the empty seat beside her, oddly troubled by his departure. When the bus finally reached her stop, the rain had subsided to a steady drizzle. Rebecca stepped off, immediately recognizing the familiar surroundings of her neighborhood. The well-lit streets and elegant townhomes were a stark contrast to the industrial area where she'd boarded. She walked the short distance to her home, a modern two-story with clean architectural lines that had been featured in a design magazine the previous year. Inside, the silence of her house greeted her. Rebecca moved through her evening routine mechanically, changing out of her damp clothes, retrieving her wallet from her other handbag, plugging in her dead phone. Everything was exactly where it should be, organized and efficient, just like the rest of her life. As she prepared for bed, Rebecca found her thoughts repeatedly returning to the encounter on the bus. Marcus Johnson had given her his last few dollars without hesitation, without even knowing who she was. The gesture shouldn't have affected her so deeply. It was just $10, an insignificant amount that she wouldn't even notice missing from her own wallet. Yet something about the interaction had unsettled her carefully ordered world. Morning arrived with clear skies, as Marcus had predicted. Rebecca's phone, now fully charged, buzzed with notifications, emails, meeting reminders, news alerts about Hayes Corporation's latest acquisition. She moved through her morning preparation with practiced efficiency, dressing in another impeccably tailored suit, applying makeup with precision, mentally rehearsing her agenda for the day. At the office, Rebecca slipped back into her role as CEO without missing a beat. The temporary relocation had disrupted some routines, but her team had adapted quickly under her leadership. Michael handed her a coffee as she entered her office. "The legal team sent over the final acquisition documents for your review," he said, placing a folder on her desk, "and the marketing department needs your approval on the press release by noon." "Thank you, Michael. I'll have both completed within the hour." He paused at the door. "Oh, and your car service called to apologize for the system outage last night. They're offering a credit to your account." "That's fine," Rebecca said, already opening the folder. "Please confirm my regular pickup schedule for today." As Michael left, Rebecca found herself staring at the document before her without reading it. The words blurred slightly as her mind drifted back to the bus stop, to Marcus counting out his last dollars to help a stranger. Had anyone in her professional circle ever done something for her without calculating what they might gain in return? Throughout the morning, Rebecca's thoughts kept returning to the encounter, disrupting her usual focus. During a conference call, she found herself studying the hands of her executives on the video feed, smooth, manicured, untouched by physical labor, so different from Marcus's calloused palms and work-stained fingers. At lunch, she declined her usual delivery order and instead walked to the window, gazing out at the city below. Somewhere out there, Marcus Johnson was going about his day, probably never giving a second thought to the woman he'd helped. The business card she'd given him would likely end up forgotten in a drawer or tossed away. The realization bothered her more than it should have. Rebecca Hayes wasn't accustomed to being forgotten or dismissed. In her world, her name opened doors, commanded attention, inspired either admiration or envy. The possibility that her identity might mean nothing to someone was strangely humbling. By late afternoon, Rebecca had made a decision. Opening her laptop, she began searching for information on maintenance staff at the nearby university. Marcus had mentioned fixing a pipe in the science building, which narrowed the possibilities. It wasn't difficult for someone with her resources to find what she was looking for. Marcus Johnson, Facilities Maintenance, Physical Plant Division, Westfield University. Tomorrow, Rebecca decided, she would pay him back. It wasn't about the money, it was about restoring the proper order of things. In her world, debts were settled, accounts balanced. This loose end needed to be tied up neatly, and then she could stop thinking about the maintenance worker with the kind eyes who had offered his last dollars to a stranger at a bus stop. Rebecca's morning meeting dragged on longer than scheduled, forcing her to reschedule 2 calls. Normally, this kind of disruption would irritate her, but today she found herself distracted, checking her watch repeatedly as the marketing team continued their presentation. Her planned visit to Westfield University kept pushing to the forefront of her mind. Rebecca, your thoughts on the campaign direction? The marketing director's voice pulled her back to the present. The concept is solid, she replied smoothly, years of practice allowing her to sound engaged despite her wandering attention. But I want to see more emphasis on the sustainability angle. Our investors are increasingly focused on ESG metrics. The team nodded, making notes. Rebecca wrapped up the meeting efficiently, gathering her materials as the room cleared. Michael, she called to her assistant. I need to handle a personal matter this afternoon. Clear my schedule from 2 to 4. Michael looked surprised, but nodded. Of course. Should I reschedule the vendor call? Yes, move it to tomorrow morning. Rebecca returned to her office, closing the door behind her. She sat at her desk, opening her laptop to review what she'd learned about Marcus Johnson. 32 years old, employed by Westfield University's Physical Plant Division for 7 years, responsible for maintenance in the science and engineering buildings. His personnel file wasn't accessible, of course, but public records indicated he lived in the Oakwood Apartments, the building she'd seen him enter the night before. Rebecca caught herself and closed the browser window, suddenly uncomfortable with her research. This was excessive for returning $10. She could simply mail a check to the university's maintenance department, yet something compelled her to make this repayment in person. At precisely 2 o'clock, Rebecca left her office building. Rather than calling her car service, she took a taxi to Westfield University, a sprawling campus of brick buildings and tree-lined paths just 20 minutes from the Hayes Corporation's temporary offices. The taxi dropped her at the administration building, where a campus map directed her to the Physical Plant Division, housed in a utilitarian structure behind the science complex. As she walked across campus in her designer heels, Rebecca felt conspicuously out of place among the casual students and faculty. Her tailored suit and confident stride drew curious glances. The maintenance building was industrial and practical, with a small reception area staffed by an older woman with reading glasses perched on her nose. "May I help you?" the receptionist asked, clearly surprised by Rebecca's presence. "I'm looking for Marcus Johnson," Rebecca said. "Is he available?" The woman regarded her suspiciously. "Is there a maintenance issue? Requests should go through the online system." "No, it's a personal matter," Rebecca explained, unused to having her inquiries questioned. "Could you please let him know Rebecca Hayes is here to see him?" Something in her tone must have conveyed authority because the receptionist picked up her phone without further questions. After a brief conversation, she pointed toward a hallway. "Break room at the end of the hall. He's on lunch." Rebecca thanked her and walked down the institutional corridor, passing workshops and storage areas. The break room door was open, revealing a simple space with vending machines, a refrigerator, and several tables. Marcus sat alone, eating a sandwich while reading something on his phone. He looked up as she appeared in the doorway, recognition and surprise crossing his face. "Ms. Hayes," he said, setting down his sandwich and standing up. "I wasn't expecting to see you here." Rebecca suddenly felt the absurdity of her presence, a CEO tracking down a maintenance worker to return bus fare, but she'd come this far. "I wanted to repay you for your help last night," she said, retrieving an envelope from her purse. "I hope I'm not interrupting your lunch." Marcus gestured to the seat across from him. "Not at all, but you didn't need to come all this way." Rebecca sat down, placing the envelope on the table between them. "I don't like leaving debts unpaid." Marcus glanced at the envelope but didn't take it. It wasn't a debt, just one person helping another. "Nevertheless," Rebecca insisted, pushing the envelope toward him, "please accept this as my thanks." With obvious reluctance, Marcus picked up the envelope and opened it. His eyes widened slightly at the $100 bill inside. "This is way too much," he said, attempting to hand it back. "The fare was only $10. "Consider the rest a token of my appreciation for your kindness," Rebecca said, refusing to take the envelope. "It's important to me." Marcus studied her face for a moment as if trying to understand her motivation. "Most people would have just forgotten about it," he observed. "I'm not most people," Rebecca replied, the phrase slipping out before she could consider how it sounded. To her surprise, Marcus smiled. "No, I don't think you are." He carefully folded the bill and returned it to the envelope. "Thank you, but it still seems unnecessary." An awkward silence fell between them. Rebecca realized she hadn't planned beyond this moment. Her mission was accomplished, debt repaid, account balanced, yet she felt oddly reluctant to leave. "How's the pipe in the science building?" she asked, grasping for conversation. Marcus looked surprised that she remembered. "Fixed, though we're keeping an eye on it. Old buildings, old plumbing, always something breaking." Rebecca nodded, glancing around the simple break room. Everything here was utilitarian, functional rather than aesthetic, so different from the designer spaces of her corporate world. "Do you enjoy your work?" she asked, genuinely curious. "Most days," Marcus replied. "I like fixing things, solving problems. Every day is different. At this rate, I'll have my degree sometime in the next decade." He smiled, making it clear he was at peace with the slow progress. "That's admirable," Rebecca said, genuinely impressed by his persistence. "Balancing work and education isn't easy." "Neither is building a corporation from the ground up," Marcus countered. "We all have our challenges." The simple equality in his statement struck Rebecca. In her world, achievements were constantly measured, compared, ranked. Marcus acknowledged her success without diminishing his own path, seeing both as valid forms of persistence. "Why engineering?" she asked. "I've always liked understanding how things work, fixing problems," he explained. "Engineering is just that on a bigger scale. Instead of patching up someone else's design, maybe someday I'll create something that works right from the start." Rebecca nodded, recognizing the ambition behind his modest words. This wasn't just a maintenance worker with a casual interest in classes. There was a vision there, a drive not unlike her own, though expressed differently. "What made you start your company?" Marcus asked. Rebecca considered the question. Most people asked about her success strategies or business model, not her initial motivation. "I saw inefficiencies in how businesses operated," she began, "problems that needed solving. But more than that, I wanted to build something that was mine, something that reflected my values and vision. I was tired of implementing other people's ideas." Marcus nodded. "Creating versus maintaining. I get that." Their conversation flowed more naturally after that, moving between topics with surprising ease. Marcus described a complex plumbing issue he'd solved in one of the lab buildings, his eyes lighting up as he detailed his systematic approach to the problem. Rebecca found herself explaining a recent acquisition strategy, dropping the simplified language she typically used with non-business people. When Marcus's break timer beeped, Rebecca was surprised to discover that 30 minutes had passed. The time had disappeared in conversation that had felt effortless, engaging, and oddly refreshing. "I should let you get back to work," she said, gathering her empty coffee cup. "This was a much better thank you than the money," Marcus said, standing, "though I still think helping with bus fare doesn't warrant either." Rebecca made a spontaneous decision. "Let me thank you properly then. Coffee, real coffee, not a quick break in a basement hallway. There's a place near campus, Riverstone Cafe. Are you free tomorrow?" The invitation hung between them, and Rebecca felt a flicker of unfamiliar nervousness. In business, she made offers with complete confidence, knowing her position and power. This felt different, more personal, with an outcome she couldn't predict. Marcus seemed equally surprised by the invitation. He studied her for a moment, perhaps trying to decipher her motivation. "Sure," he said finally. "I can meet you after my shift ends at 5. "Perfect. Riverstone at 5:30 tomorrow." Rebecca extended her hand formally, falling back on business etiquette. "Thank you for the conversation, Marcus." He shook her hand, his grip firm but gentle. "See you tomorrow, Rebecca." As she walked back across campus, Rebecca tried to make sense of her actions. She had repaid her debt twice over now, first with money, then with coffee. There was no logical reason to pursue further contact, yet she found herself looking forward to tomorrow's meeting with an anticipation that had nothing to do with obligation and everything to do with genuine interest in continuing their conversation. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Rebecca Hayes had made plans that appeared nowhere on her carefully managed calendar, with a person who existed entirely outside her professional sphere. The thought was both unsettling and strangely exhilarating. Riverstone Cafe occupied the ground floor of a renovated textile mill, its exposed brick walls and industrial lighting creating an atmosphere both rustic and refined. Rebecca arrived 15 minutes early, selecting a quiet corner table with a view of both the entrance and the river beyond the large windows. She had left work at 5, changing from her business suit into dark jeans and a cashmere sweater. Still elegant, but less conspicuously corporate. The cafe filled with the after-work crowd, professors grading papers, students with textbooks spread across tables, young professionals typing on laptops. Rebecca checked her watch, then immediately chided herself for the gesture. This wasn't a business meeting with a schedule to maintain. At precisely 5:30, Marcus entered. He had also changed after work, wearing clean jeans and a simple button-down shirt. His hair was damp, as if freshly showered. He spotted her and wove through the tables, appearing slightly out of place in the trendy establishment. "I hope I didn't keep you waiting," he said, settling into the chair across from her. "Not at all," Rebecca replied. "I just arrived myself." The small lie came automatically, a social nicety she'd perfected over years of business lunches. Marcus glanced around the cafe, taking in the artisanal menu written on a chalkboard wall and the carefully curated decor. "Nice place," he observed. "Do you come here often?" "First time, actually," Rebecca admitted. "I read about it online. Supposedly, they make the best pour-over coffee in the city." A server approached, and they ordered, Marcus choosing a simple black coffee, Rebecca a specialty blend. When the server suggested their artisanal small plates, Rebecca ordered several to share, waving away Marcus's concern about the prices. "Consider it a proper thank you," she insisted. "Besides, I'm curious to try them." Their coffees arrived in handcrafted ceramic mugs, accompanied by the first of the small plates, tiny works of culinary art that seemed almost too precious to eat. "So," Marcus said, taking a sip of his coffee, "what's a typical day like for a CEO?" Rebecca considered the question. "Less glamorous than people imagine. Meetings, mostly. Decisions about strategy, approving plans, reviewing performance metrics." She paused. "Actually, the parts I enjoy most are the problem-solving moments, when something unexpected happens, and we need to adapt quickly." "Not so different from maintenance work," Marcus observed, "except my problems involve burst pipes and electrical failures rather than corporate strategies." "Both require quick thinking and creative solutions," Rebecca agreed, "though I suspect your results are more immediately visible than mine." Their conversation flowed easily, moving from work to broader topics. Rebecca found herself unexpectedly engaged, listening as Marcus described his evening engineering classes and the prototype solar water heater he was designing for his final project. "The professor thinks it has commercial potential," he explained, his enthusiasm evident. "It's more efficient than current models and uses materials that are easier to source sustainably." "Have you considered patenting it?" Rebecca asked, her business mind automatically assessing opportunities. "Eventually, maybe. First, I need to finish the prototype and make sure it actually works consistently," Marcus replied. "Patents are expensive, and I'm operating on a maintenance worker's budget." Rebecca nodded, careful not to offer financial assistance that might seem condescending. Instead, she found herself describing an early business challenge she'd faced when founding Hayes Corporation, a competitor trying to poach her development team by offering substantial salary increases. I couldn't match the money, she explained, so I had to find other incentives, ownership stakes, flexible schedules, a purpose they believed in. We lost 2 people, but the core team stayed. Sometimes, money isn't the most important factor, Marcus agreed. Like my university job, I could make more in private sector maintenance, but the tuition benefit is worth more to me long term. As they shared the small plates and ordered second cups of coffee, Rebecca realized she was more relaxed than she'd been in months. There was no agenda here, no strategic objective, no impression to manage. Just conversation with someone whose perspective she found genuinely interesting. The server brought their check, which Rebecca immediately took. I invited you, she said firmly when Marcus reached for his wallet. This was my thank you, remember? Outside, the autumn evening had turned cool, street lamps illuminating fallen leaves on the sidewalk. They stood somewhat awkwardly, the natural conclusion of their coffee meeting reached. Thank you for the coffee, Marcus said, and the conversation. I enjoyed it, Rebecca replied honestly. It's refreshing to talk about something other than quarterly projections and market strategies. Marcus smiled. I imagine being CEO means most people want something from you. The observation was disarmingly accurate. Rebecca nodded, surprised by his insight. Most conversations in my world have an underlying purpose. Someone seeking approval, funding, promotion, or connection. Must get exhausting, Marcus said simply. Before Rebecca could respond, her phone buzzed. Checking it reflexively, she saw an urgent message from her CFO about a potential issue with the acquisition numbers. Work emergency? Marcus asked, noting her expression. Unfortunately, yes, Rebecca sighed. I need to make some calls. Of course, Marcus said, stepping back slightly. Thanks again for the coffee. Rebecca hesitated, suddenly reluctant to end the evening so abruptly. Perhaps we could do this again sometime? The invitation surprised them both. Marcus studied her face, perhaps searching for the hidden agenda she'd just described as typical in her world. I'd like that, he said finally. I hope I didn't keep you waiting, he said, settling into the chair across from her. Not at all, Rebecca replied. I just arrived myself. The small lie came automatically, a social nicety she'd perfected over years of business lunches. Marcus glanced around the cafe, taking in the artisanal menu written on a chalkboard wall and the carefully curated decor. Nice place, he observed. Do you come here often? First time, actually, Rebecca admitted. I read about it online. Supposedly they make the best pour-over coffee in the city. A server approached and they ordered, Marcus choosing a simple black coffee, Rebecca a specialty blend. When the server suggested their artisanal small plates, Rebecca ordered several to share, waving away Marcus's concern about the prices. Consider it a proper thank you, she insisted. Besides, I'm curious to try them. Their coffees arrived in handcrafted ceramic mugs, accompanied by the first of the small plates, tiny works of culinary art that seemed almost too precious to eat. So, Marcus said, taking a sip of his coffee, what's a typical day like for a CEO? Rebecca considered the question. Less glamorous than people imagine. Meetings, mostly, decisions about strategy, approving plans, reviewing performance metrics. She paused. Actually, the parts I enjoy most are the problem-solving moments, when something unexpected happens and we need to adapt quickly. Not so different from maintenance work, Marcus observed, except my problems involve burst pipes and electrical failures rather than corporate strategies. Both require quick thinking and creative solutions, Rebecca agreed, though I suspect your results are more immediately visible than mine. Their conversation flowed easily, moving from work to broader topics. Rebecca found herself unexpectedly engaged, listening as Marcus described his evening engineering classes and the prototype solar water heater he was designing for his final project. The professor thinks it has commercial potential, he explained, his enthusiasm evident. It's more efficient than current models and uses materials that are easier to source sustainably. Have you considered patenting it? Rebecca asked, her business mind automatically assessing opportunities. Eventually, maybe. First, I need to finish the prototype and make sure it actually works consistently, Marcus replied. Patents are expensive and I'm operating on a maintenance worker's budget. Rebecca nodded, careful not to offer financial assistance that might seem condescending. Instead, she found herself describing an early business challenge she'd faced when founding Hayes Corporation, a competitor trying to poach her development team by offering substantial salary increases. I couldn't match the money, she explained, so I had to find other incentives. Ownership stakes, flexible schedules, a purpose they believed in. We lost 2 people, but the core team stayed. Sometimes money isn't the most important factor, Marcus agreed. Like my university job, I could make more in private sector maintenance, but the tuition benefit is worth more to me long term. As they shared the small plates and ordered second cups of coffee, Rebecca realized she was more relaxed than she'd been in months. There was no agenda here, no strategic objective, no impression to manage, just conversation with someone whose perspective she found genuinely interesting. The server brought their check, which Rebecca immediately took. I invited you, she said firmly when Marcus reached for his wallet. This was my thank you, remember? Outside, the autumn evening had turned cool, street lamps illuminating fallen leaves on the sidewalk. They stood somewhat awkwardly, the natural conclusion of their coffee meeting reached. Thank you for the coffee, Marcus said, and the conversation. I enjoyed it, Rebecca replied honestly. It's refreshing to talk about something other than quarterly projections and market strategies. Marcus smiled. I imagine being CEO means most people want something from you. The observation was disarmingly accurate. Rebecca nodded, surprised by his insight. Most conversations in my world have an underlying purpose. Someone seeking approval, funding, promotion, or connection. Must get exhausting, Marcus said simply. Before Rebecca could respond, her phone buzzed. Checking it reflexively, she saw an urgent message from her CFO about a potential issue with the acquisition numbers. Work emergency? Marcus asked, noting her expression. Unfortunately, yes, Rebecca sighed. I need to make some calls. Of course, Marcus said, stepping back slightly. Thanks again for the coffee. Rebecca hesitated, suddenly reluctant to end the evening so abruptly. Perhaps we could do this again sometime? The invitation surprised them both. Marcus studied her face, perhaps searching for the hidden agenda she'd just described as typical in her world. I'd like that, he said finally. Maybe something besides coffee next time? What did you have in mind? There's a street food festival this weekend in Riverside Park, he suggested. Less fancy than this place, but the food's amazing. Real food, not artistic arrangements that leave you still hungry. Rebecca laughed at his gentle teasing about the cafe's pretentious small plates. That sounds perfect. Saturday? They exchanged phone numbers, Rebecca noting that Marcus's phone was several generations old with a cracked screen protector, and agreed to meet at the park entrance at noon on Saturday. As Rebecca walked to her car, she found herself smiling. The coffee meeting had been intended as a simple thank you, a way to repay a kindness and satisfy her own peculiar fixation on the bus stop encounter. Instead, it had evolved into something unexpected, a genuine connection with someone entirely outside her usual circles. Her phone buzzed again with another message from the CFO. Rebecca slipped into CEO mode as she returned the call, her voice taking on the authoritative tone she used for business matters. But even as she discussed financial discrepancies and mitigation strategies, part of her mind remained on the upcoming Saturday meeting. Not a business lunch or strategic alliance, but simply an afternoon at a food festival with a maintenance worker who saw her as a person first and a CEO second. Rebecca's morning executive meeting ran long, pushing against her plans for the afternoon. As the team discussed quarterly projections, her chief marketing officer made a pointed comment. "Rebecca, before we wrap up, I wanted to mention that Clarissa Montgomery from Venture Weekly has been trying to schedule that profile piece on you. Their Visionary Leaders special issue goes to print in 3 weeks." Rebecca nodded, making a note on her tablet. "Have Michael coordinate a time. Early next week should work." "One more thing," added Diane, her VP of Operations, with a casual tone that immediately put Rebecca on alert. "I saw you at Riverstone Cafe the other evening. I would have said hello, but you seemed deep in conversation with your companion." Several heads turned with barely disguised interest. Rebecca maintained her composed expression, though she felt a flicker of irritation at the unspoken question. "A personal matter," she replied evenly. "Now, if there's nothing else urgent, I believe we've covered today's agenda. Thank you, everyone." As the team filed out, Rebecca noticed the glances exchanged, the subtle raising of eyebrows. She had never discussed her personal life at work, maintaining a careful separation between her professional and private spheres. Now, a simple coffee meeting had become an object of speculation. In her office, Rebecca reviewed emails while eating a salad at her desk. A message from the acquisition team required her attention, but her thoughts kept drifting to the street food festival. She hadn't attended something so informal in years, her social calendar typically filled with charity galas, industry conferences, and carefully orchestrated business dinners. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Still on for tomorrow? Meeting at park entrance at noon." Rebecca smiled at the simple message. "Looking forward to it," she replied. Just as she set her phone down, Michael appeared at her door. "Rebecca, the board chairman called. He wants to discuss the Montgomery acquisition personally before the formal announcement next week." "Schedule a dinner," Rebecca said. "Monday evening at Constantine's. Also, Diane mentioned you might need Venture Weekly on your calendar. I've tentatively scheduled that for Tuesday morning." Rebecca nodded, returning her attention to her laptop. As Michael turned to leave, he hesitated. "Is there anything else you need? Any weekend appointments to add to your calendar?" The question seemed innocent enough, but Rebecca caught the undertone of curiosity. News traveled fast in corporate settings. "No, thank you, Michael. My personal calendar is under control." After he left, Rebecca leaned back in her chair, considering the subtle shift in office dynamics. One coffee meeting with Marcus, and already people were taking notice, making assumptions. What would they think of a street food festival? Of her spending time with a university maintenance worker? The thought gave her pause. Why did it matter what they thought? She was CEO. Her personal time was her own. Yet she knew perception mattered in leadership positions. People watched her choices, her associations, making judgments that could impact her authority. Saturday arrived with perfect autumn weather, crisp air, golden sunshine, scattered clouds. Rebecca dressed carefully in dark jeans, a soft sweater, and leather boots, casual but still refined. She drove herself to Riverside Park, finding parking several blocks away. The festival atmosphere was immediately apparent. Colorful flags, music, the mingled aromas of a dozen different cuisines. Families with children, couples holding hands, groups of friends laughing together. Rebecca felt oddly out of practice with such simple, unstructured social events. Marcus waited by the entrance as promised, dressed in jeans and a faded university sweatshirt. He seemed perfectly at ease in the casual setting, waving when he spotted her. "You made it," he said with a genuine smile. "I was half expecting a last-minute CEO emergency." "I turned my phone off," Rebecca admitted. "First time in months." They entered the festival together, walking past colorful food trucks and stalls offering cuisine from around the world. Marcus seemed to know exactly which vendors were worth visiting, guiding Rebecca toward a small truck with a long line. "Best tacos in the city," he explained. "Trust me, they're worth the wait." As they stood in line, Rebecca noticed the diverse crowd around them. People from all walks of life enjoying the simple pleasure of good food in the autumn sunshine. No one gave her a second glance. No one knew or cared that she was CEO of Hayes Corporation. The anonymity was strangely liberating. The tacos lived up to Marcus's praise. Fresh, flavorful. Nothing like the carefully plated meals at the high-end restaurants she typically frequented for business dinners. They found a spot on the grass, sitting cross-legged like college students as they ate. "What do you think?" Marcus asked. "Better than those tiny artistic plates at Riverstone?" Rebecca laughed. "Definitely more satisfying. You clearly know your way around food trucks." "One of the benefits of working-class life," he said without self-pity. "You learn where to find good food that doesn't empty your wallet." They spent the afternoon sampling various cuisines, listening to local bands, and walking along the riverside path. Rebecca found herself relaxing into the experience, her usual hyper-awareness of time and schedule gradually fading. As the afternoon progressed, they found themselves sitting on a bench overlooking the river, paper cups of hot cider warming their hands. Their conversation had evolved from casual observations to more personal topics. Marcus described growing up with a single mother who worked multiple jobs to support him and his sister. "She's the one who taught me to fix things," he explained. "Couldn't afford repair services, so we learned to do it ourselves. Turned out I had a knack for it." Rebecca shared stories of the early days building her company, the sleepless nights and constant uncertainty. "Everyone sees the success now, but they didn't see the years of ramen noodle dinners and maxed-out credit cards." "You built something meaningful," Marcus observed. "That's rare no matter what world you come from." As evening approached, bringing a cooler breeze off the river, Rebecca realized she'd spent the entire afternoon without once checking the time or thinking about work. The realization was both unsettling and exhilarating. Walking back toward the parking area, they passed a group of expensively dressed women, leaving the art gallery adjacent to the park. One of them, Jennifer Caldwell, sat on the Hayes Corporation Board of Directors. "Rebecca!" Jennifer called, surprise evident in her voice. "I thought that was you." Rebecca felt Marcus tense slightly beside her as she greeted the board member. "Jennifer, hello. Enjoying the exhibition?" "Yes, though the Malevich retrospective in New York was superior," Jennifer replied, her gaze shifting curiously to Marcus. She waited, clearly expecting an introduction. "This is Marcus Johnson," Rebecca said simply. "Marcus, Jennifer Caldwell." Jennifer extended her hand with practiced grace. "Lovely to meet you. Are you in technology as well?" "Maintenance and engineering," Marcus replied, his handshake firm and confident despite the obvious assessment in Jennifer's eyes. "How fascinating," Jennifer said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Rebecca, don't forget the charity gala next weekend. The foundation is counting on your usual generous support." "Of course," Rebecca replied. "Have a lovely evening, Jennifer." As they continued walking, Rebecca could feel Jennifer's gaze following them, could practically hear the questions forming. Monday's office gossip had just received fresh fuel. "Friend of yours?" Marcus asked. "Board member," Rebecca explained, "and significant shareholder." Marcus nodded, understanding the implications. "That's going to make your Monday interesting." Rebecca looked at him, appreciating his perceptiveness. "Probably, but it's my personal time, not company business." "Is it that simple in your world?" Marcus asked, his tone gentle rather than accusatory. Rebecca considered the question honestly. "No, not always. People make assumptions, draw conclusions." "About you spending time with someone like me?" The question hung between them, acknowledging the reality they'd both been aware of throughout the day. They came from different worlds, with different expectations and perceptions. "Yes," Rebecca admitted, "but that's their problem, not mine." As they reached the point where they would part ways, Rebecca felt a reluctance to end the day. Marcus seemed to share the feeling, his usual directness momentarily replaced by hesitation. "I had a good time today," he said finally. "Best Saturday I've had in a while." "So did I," Rebecca replied. "Thank you for introducing me to the wonders of food trucks." They stood facing each other, the moment stretching into awkward territory. Rebecca was unaccustomed to uncertainty in social situations, yet found herself unsure of the appropriate next step. Marcus solved the dilemma with characteristic straightforwardness. "I'd like to see you again, Rebecca, but I think we both know this gets complicated if it continues." Rebecca appreciated his honesty. "Yes, it does. But I'd like to see you again, too." They arranged to meet the following weekend, acknowledging the complications but choosing to continue anyway. As Rebecca drove home, she found herself smiling, despite the knowledge that Monday would bring questions and speculation. For the first time in years, she had spent a day doing exactly what she wanted, with someone who wanted nothing from her except her company. The simplicity of it felt revolutionary. The charity gala invitation had been on Rebecca's calendar for months, an annual event that drew the city's business elite, politicians, and social leaders. In previous years, she had attended alone or with a carefully selected business associate, using the evening to strengthen strategic relationships while supporting a worthy cause. This year felt different. As Rebecca examined the gilt-edged invitation on her desk, she found herself considering an unconventional possibility. "Michael," she called through the open door to her assistant, "do we have the final guest list for the Burlington Foundation Gala?" Michael appeared with his tablet. "Yes, right here. Your table includes the Blackwells, the Moores, and Jennifer Caldwell with her husband." Rebecca nodded, noting that Jennifer had been assigned to her table. Not a coincidence, she suspected. "I'll be bringing a guest," she said, the decision crystallizing as she spoke. "Please update the RSVP." Michael's expression remained professionally neutral, though Rebecca caught the flicker of surprise. "Of course. May I have the name for the place card?" "Marcus Johnson." The subtle widening of Michael's eyes confirmed that office gossip had been circulating since her encounter with Jennifer at the park. "I'll take care of it right away." After Michael left, Rebecca picked up her phone, hesitating briefly before texting Marcus. Their relationship, whatever it was becoming, had continued to develop over the past few weeks. They had met for dinner at a small neighborhood restaurant near the university, spent a Sunday afternoon at a local museum, and talked for hours over coffee at a quiet cafe. Each meeting had deepened their connection, despite, or perhaps because of, their different backgrounds and perspectives. "Would you be interested in attending a charity gala with me this Saturday evening?" she typed. "Formal attire required, I'm afraid. No pressure if it's not your thing." His response came a few minutes later. "Formal as in black tie?" "Not sure I have the wardrobe for that world." Rebecca smiled at his directness. "Yes, black tie." "Don't worry about that part. I can help with arrangements if you'd like to come." The three dots appeared and disappeared several times before his reply. "Are you sure you want me there? Seems like your professional crowd might not know what to make of me." His perception was accurate, which only strengthened Rebecca's resolve. "I'm sure, but only if you'd be comfortable." His final response, "Then I'd be honored. But I draw the line at you buying me a tux. I'll figure something out." Rebecca set her phone down, a mixture of anticipation and apprehension settling in her chest. Bringing Marcus to the gala would make a statement, whether she intended it or not. Her private life would become undeniably public in the tight-knit world of corporate leadership. The week passed in a blur of preparations for the Montgomery acquisition announcement. The deal had finally closed, representing a major expansion for Hayes Corporation and a personal victory for Rebecca, who had pursued the acquisition against some board resistance. By Friday, the announcement had generated significant positive press, with business publications praising her strategic vision. Saturday evening arrived clear and cool. Rebecca dressed with particular care in a midnight blue gown that managed to be both elegant and understated. She arranged to meet Marcus at the gala venue rather than picking him up, sensing he would prefer to arrive on his own terms. The Burlington Hotel's grand ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers and floral arrangements. Rebecca arrived early, as was her habit, greeting foundation board members and fellow donors with practiced ease. She was discussing renewable energy investments with the mayor when she spotted Marcus entering the ballroom. He wore a perfectly fitted tuxedo that suggested rental rather than ownership, but carried himself with natural confidence. His hair was neatly trimmed, and he had the same steady gaze that had first caught her attention at the bus stop. Several heads turned as he scanned the room, clearly searching for her. Rebecca excused herself from the mayor and moved to greet him. "You clean up rather well," she said with a genuine smile. "You look beautiful," Marcus replied simply. She led him toward the bar, making introductions to people they passed. Most responded with polite curiosity, though Rebecca noticed the subtle evaluations taking place. The quick assessment of Marcus's attire, his handshake, his diction. She found herself watching these interactions with new awareness, increasingly uncomfortable with the unspoken judgments. "CEO of Hayes Corporation," a silver-haired man repeated after Rebecca introduced herself to his wife. "Your acquisition of Montgomery Systems was brilliantly executed. My firm very nearly made a competing offer." "Thank you," Rebecca replied. "We've been pursuing it for some time." "And you are with Hayes as well?" the man asked Marcus. "No, I'm in maintenance and engineering at Westfield University," Marcus answered. A brief but telling silence followed. "How interesting," the man said finally, his tone suggesting the opposite. "If you'll excuse us, I see our dinner companions arriving." As they moved away, Marcus leaned closer to Rebecca. "That's going to happen all night, isn't it?" "Probably," she admitted. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," Marcus said. "I knew what I was walking into. I'm here for you, not them." The simple statement touched Rebecca deeply. In her world, people attended events like this with calculated purposes, to be seen, to make connections, to advance agendas. Marcus's motivation was refreshingly uncomplicated. Dinner proved to be exactly as challenging as Rebecca had anticipated. Jennifer Caldwell greeted Marcus with practiced cordiality that didn't reach her eyes. Her husband barely acknowledged him at all. The Blackwells and Moores, longtime business associates of Rebecca's, exchanged glances that broadcast their confusion at her choice of escort. Throughout the meal, Rebecca watched as Marcus was alternately ignored and subjected to condescending questions about his work. He handled each interaction with dignity, neither apologizing for his profession nor attempting to impress. When the conversation turned to investments and market projections, he listened attentively without pretending expertise. "So, Marcus," Jennifer said during dessert, her voice carrying just enough to attract attention from neighboring tables, "Rebecca mentioned you're studying engineering. A night school program, is it?" The subtle emphasis on night school wasn't lost on anyone at the table. Rebecca felt a surge of anger at the deliberate diminishment. "Part-time studies," Marcus corrected politely. "Westfield's program is quite rigorous, even for full-time students." "And what do you hope to do with this education?" Jennifer's husband asked, his tone suggesting genuine curiosity about this exotic specimen from another world. Before Marcus could answer, Jennifer added, "Besides maintenance work, of course." Rebecca set down her dessert fork with deliberate care. The moment had arrived. The choice between maintaining social harmony with important business connections or defending Marcus against the subtle attacks. This time, she didn't hesitate. "Marcus is developing a solar water heating system with revolutionary efficiency metrics," she said clearly. "His professor believes it has significant commercial potential. In fact, I've been encouraging him to consider patent protection." The table fell silent, surprised by her direct intervention. Marcus gave her a small, grateful smile. "How interesting," Jennifer said, her expression suggesting anything but interest. "Rebecca, you've always had an eye for undiscovered talent." The implication hung in the air, unmistakable to everyone at the table. Rebecca felt Marcus tense beside her, saw the flicker of hurt and anger cross his face before his expression settled back into calm dignity. In that moment, something shifted within Rebecca. The carefully constructed social order of her world, with its unspoken rules and hierarchies, suddenly seemed arbitrary and cruel. Marcus had more genuine integrity than most of the people in this glittering ballroom, yet they dismissed him based on his occupation and background. "If you'll excuse us," Rebecca said, standing abruptly. "I believe they're about to start the fundraising portion of the evening. Marcus, shall we find a better view of the stage?" Without waiting for a response from the table, she led Marcus away, her hand firmly on his arm. They found a quiet spot near one of the large windows overlooking the city. "I'm sorry about that," she said quietly. "Not your fault," Marcus replied, "but I think we've confirmed that our worlds don't mix very well." Rebecca looked out at the city lights, then back to Marcus's face. "Perhaps it's not our worlds that need to mix. Perhaps it's just us." Before he could respond, the Foundation director took the stage, beginning the formal fundraising appeal. The moment for further conversation passed, but Rebecca kept her hand on Marcus's arm, a silent statement to anyone watching. As the evening progressed, Rebecca became increasingly aware of the whispers, the glances, the subtle shifts in how people approached her. Her choice of companion had not gone unnoticed, and judgments were being made. For the first time in her professional life, Rebecca found she didn't care. Rebecca arrived at her office Monday morning to find an email from the board chairman requesting an immediate meeting. The message was terse, unusual for the typically verbose Herbert Wilson. She instructed Michael to clear her morning schedule and walk to the chairman's office with measured steps, mentally preparing for the confrontation she had anticipated since the gala. Herbert's assistant ushered her in immediately. The chairman sat behind his imposing desk, Jennifer Caldwell in one of the visitor chairs. Rebecca noted the alliance with a calm that belied her racing thoughts. "Rebecca, thank you for coming so promptly," Herbert began. "Please, have a seat." Rebecca chose the chair opposite Jennifer, maintaining her composed expression. "I gather this is about the gala Saturday night." Herbert exchanged glances with Jennifer. "Partially. Several board members have expressed concerns about recent behaviors that seem out of character for you." "Out of character?" Rebecca repeated. "I'm not sure I understand." Jennifer leaned forward. "Rebecca, we value your leadership. Your vision built this company into what it is today. But leadership requires certain standards, certain associations that reflect the company's values." "Are you suggesting my personal relationships are board business?" Herbert sighed. "When those relationships become public at company-sponsored events, yes. Your companion on Saturday night raised eyebrows, Rebecca. A maintenance worker? It creates confusion about your judgment." Rebecca felt a surge of indignation but kept her voice level. "Marcus Johnson is pursuing an engineering degree and developing an innovative solar technology. More importantly, he is someone I choose to spend time with. I wasn't aware the board had approval rights over my personal life." "Don't be deliberately obtuse," Jennifer said sharply. "You know perception matters in our position. Your choices reflect on Hayes Corporation." "And what exactly about Marcus reflects poorly on Hayes?" Rebecca challenged. "His integrity, his work ethic, his intelligence, or just his job title and bank balance?" Herbert raised a placating hand. "No one is questioning his character, Rebecca, but differences in background create complications. We're concerned about your focus. The Montgomery acquisition was brilliant, but since then, you've been distracted, taking unscheduled afternoons off, leaving early for personal engagements." Rebecca straightened in her chair. "My work has not suffered. The Montgomery deal closed successfully. Our quarterly projections are strong." "For now," Jennifer interjected. "But where is this relationship going? What happens when it inevitably ends? The press will have a field day with Hayes Corporation's CEO slumming with the working class." The contempt in Jennifer's tone crystallized something in Rebecca's mind. The past few weeks with Marcus had shown her a different way of evaluating worth, not by title or wealth, but by character and authentic connection. The contrast between his genuine nature and the calculated relationships of her corporate world had become increasingly stark. "I need to be clear about something," Rebecca said quietly. "My personal life is my own. My professional performance is what concerns this board. If you have specific criticisms of my leadership or business decisions, I'm happy to address them. Herbert leaned back, studying her. Rebecca, no one questions your abilities, but leadership is about more than performance metrics. It's about judgment, about maintaining certain standards. The board feels that your recent behavior suggests a concerning shift in priorities. The board? Rebecca asked. Or just the two of you? We've consulted with other members, Jennifer said. There's consensus that you need to consider your choices more carefully. Rebecca stood, her decision forming with unexpected clarity. I appreciate your concern for the company. I share it. Hayes Corporation has been my life's work. But if the price of leadership is surrendering my personal autonomy to arbitrary social judgments, perhaps we need to reconsider our arrangement. Herbert's expression shifted from condescension to alarm. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that you have a choice to make. Either you trust my judgment as CEO, both professionally and personally, or you don't. If you don't, then perhaps it's time for new leadership. Jennifer's eyes widened. You'd resign over this, over a maintenance worker. No, Rebecca said firmly. If I resign, it would be over the principle that my personal life is my own, that my value to this company should be measured by my performance, not by whom I choose to spend time with. She moved toward the door, then paused. I'll give you until the end of the week to decide. Either you express full confidence in my leadership without conditions regarding my personal associations, or I'll submit my resignation to the full board. Rebecca left without waiting for a response, her heart pounding but her mind strangely clear. She returned to her office, closing the door behind her. For a moment she stood motionless, absorbing the enormity of what she had just done. Hayes Corporation had been her identity for so long that the thought of walking away seemed impossible. Yet the ultimatum had emerged with absolute conviction. Her phone chimed with a text from Marcus. Hope the Monday aftermath isn't too rough. Still processing that evening myself. Coffee later. Rebecca smiled despite the turmoil. Quite an aftermath brewing. Could use a friendly face. The usual place at 5. His response was immediate. I'll be there. Throughout the day, Rebecca maintained her normal schedule, reviewing reports and leading a strategy session, as if her professional future hadn't just been thrown into uncertainty. When Michael informed her that Herbert had scheduled an emergency board meeting for Friday morning, she acknowledged the information calmly. At 5 o'clock, Rebecca left the office, ignoring the curious glances of staff members who had undoubtedly noticed the unusual tension. The small cafe near the university had become their regular meeting place, a neutral ground between their two worlds. Marcus was already there, 2 coffees on the table. He stood as she approached, concern evident in his expression. That bad, huh? He asked as she sat down. Rebecca took a sip of her coffee before answering. I may have just ended my career. She recounted the morning's confrontation and her ultimatum to the board. Marcus listened without interrupting, his expression shifting from concern to disbelief. You threatened to resign? Because of me? Rebecca shook her head. Not because of you, because of what you helped me see. I've spent years playing by unwritten rules that suddenly don't make sense anymore. Judging people by their titles instead of their character. Valuing strategic connections over genuine ones. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, visibly troubled. Rebecca? Hayes Corporation is your life's work. You built it from nothing. I never wanted to come between you and that. You didn't, she insisted. You just helped me recognize what really matters. And maybe Hayes isn't what matters most anymore. What would you do? Marcus asked. If you actually resigned? The question caught Rebecca off guard. She had been so focused on the principle of the stand she was taking that she hadn't fully considered the practical aftermath. I don't know, she admitted. Start something new, perhaps. Something smaller, more aligned with what I value now. or take some time to figure out what I really want." Marcus reached across the table, taking her hand. "I never expected any of this when I offered you bus fare that night. I just saw someone who needed help." Rebecca smiled. "That's exactly it. You saw a person, not a CEO. You showed me kindness without calculation. Do you know how rare that is in my world?" "I'm beginning to understand," he said quietly, "but I don't want to be the reason you lose something you've worked so hard to build." Rebecca squeezed his hand. "You're not. If anything, you've helped me build something more important: perspective." As they continued talking, Rebecca felt a strange sense of peace, despite the professional uncertainty looming before her. Whatever happened with the board, she had drawn a line that felt true to her evolving values. For the first time in years, her identity wasn't solely defined by Hayes Corporation and her role as CEO. She was rediscovering herself as Rebecca, a woman capable of change, growth, and authentic connection. The choice she had presented to the board wasn't really about Marcus at all. It was about claiming the right to define success on her own terms. Whether that meant continuing to lead Hayes with renewed purpose or walking away to create something new, the decision would be hers, shaped by genuine values rather than arbitrary social expectations. Friday morning arrived with a clarity that matched Rebecca's resolve. She dressed with particular care, selecting a suit that had been with her since the early days of Hayes Corporation, well before designer labels and custom tailoring had become routine. The simple navy ensemble reminded her of who she had been when building the company, mattered more than status or appearances. The board meeting was scheduled for 9. Rebecca arrived at 8, reviewing key company documents and transferring personal files to her private drive. If this was to be her last day as CEO, she would leave things in impeccable order. Michael appeared at her door at 8:45, his expression a mixture of concern and confusion. "Rebecca, the board members are arriving. Is there anything you need before the meeting?" "No," she said with a calm smile. "I'm prepared." "There are rumors," he ventured carefully, "about significant changes." Rebecca nodded. "Change is inevitable in business, Michael. Sometimes necessary for growth." She gathered her tablet and a slim folder of notes, then made her way to the boardroom. The executives were already seated, conversations falling silent as she entered. Herbert Wilson sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable. Jennifer Caldwell avoided eye contact entirely. "Good morning," Rebecca said, taking her usual seat. "Shall we begin?" Herbert cleared his throat. "Before we address the agenda, I believe we need to resolve the matter discussed earlier this week." The other board members shifted uncomfortably, several looking confused. Clearly not everyone had been fully briefed on the situation. "For those who may not be aware," Herbert continued, "concerns have been raised about certain personal associations of our CEO and their potential impact on company perception." Rebecca met his gaze steadily. "To be specific, certain board members have expressed disapproval of my relationship with someone they deem socially unsuitable due to his occupation as a maintenance worker." Several board members looked surprised at her directness. Others seemed embarrassed by the explicit statement of what had been framed more diplomatically. "The concern," Jennifer interjected, "is about judgment and priorities, about maintaining the standards expected of leadership." Rebecca looked around the table, studying the faces of people she had worked with for years. Some appeared uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Others clearly aligned with Herbert and Jennifer's position. "I presented Chairman Wilson with a choice," Rebecca said calmly. "Either express full confidence in my leadership without conditions regarding my personal life, or accept my resignation." Murmurs spread around the table. Lawrence Chen, one of the original investors in Hayes Corporation, looked directly at Rebecca. "Is this truly where we are, judging our CEO's effectiveness based on who she dates rather than the value she creates?" "It's not that simple, Lawrence," Herbert replied. "Leadership requires judgment that extends beyond business decisions." "I believe," Rebecca said, that my judgment should be evaluated by my results. Hayes Corporation has grown 30% under my leadership. The Montgomery acquisition positions us strategically for the future. Our reputation for innovation and integrity is unmatched in the industry. She placed a sealed envelope on the table. That said, I stand by my position. If this board cannot separate my professional capabilities from assumptions about my personal choices, then perhaps new leadership would be best for Hayes Corporation. Herbert stared at the envelope, the possibility of her resignation suddenly concrete rather than theoretical. The room fell silent as board members exchanged glances, the gravity of the moment apparent to everyone. After what seemed an eternity, Lawrence Chen spoke again. I move that we express full confidence in Rebecca Hayes as CEO of this company, without qualification or condition regarding her personal associations. Second, said Maria Johnston, another longtime board member. Herbert looked displeased but recognized he was losing ground. Those in favor? The vote was not unanimous, but it was decisive. 8 hands raised in support, including some who had initially aligned with Herbert's concerns. Only Herbert, Jennifer, and one other member opposed. Motion carries, Herbert said tightly. Rebecca, the board expresses its confidence in your leadership. Rebecca nodded, retrieving her resignation letter. Thank you, but this situation has clarified something important for me. Hayes Corporation deserves leadership that aligns completely with its future direction. The board members looked alarmed, believing she would resign despite the vote of confidence. Therefore, Rebecca continued, I propose a restructuring of our corporate values and mission statement. I'd like to present a new vision that emphasizes not just profit and growth, but ethical leadership, diversity of perspective, and genuine human connection in our business practices. The tension in the room visibly eased. Herbert looked both relieved and wary as Rebecca outlined her vision for transforming Hayes Corporation's culture while maintaining its commitment to excellence and innovation. When the meeting concluded 2 hours later, Rebecca had not only secured her position, but gained approval for initiatives that would reshape the company's approach to everything from hiring practices to community engagement. It was, she realized, the beginning of integrating the perspectives she had gained through her relationship with Marcus into her professional life. 6 months later, Rebecca stood at the same bus stop where she had first met Marcus. The spring afternoon was mild, cherry blossoms dotting the trees along the street. She checked her watch, a simple timepiece that had replaced her designer model, one of many subtle changes in her life since the pivotal board meeting. Marcus appeared around the corner, walking from the university campus. He smiled when he saw her, quickening his pace. "How was the presentation?" Rebecca asked as he reached her. "Amazing," Marcus replied, his enthusiasm evident. "The department is officially backing the patent application for the solar heater. They think it could be marketable within a year." "That calls for a celebration," Rebecca said, taking his hand as they began walking together. "How was your day?" he asked. "The community investment program launch go well?" Rebecca nodded. "Better than expected. We've already had 30 small businesses apply for the first round of funding and mentorship." The Hayes Community Investment Initiative had been one of Rebecca's first projects after recommitting to the company. The program provided resources and guidance to small businesses in underserved communities, breaking from the corporation's traditionally narrow focus on large-scale technology solutions. They walked together toward the small cafe that had become their regular meeting place, discussing their days with the easy familiarity that had developed between them over the past months. Rebecca's life had found a new rhythm, still demanding and driven, but with space for genuine connection and values that extended beyond corporate success. Hayes Corporation had changed too. The restructured mission had attracted talented people who might previously have been overlooked, bringing fresh perspectives and innovative approaches. Profits remained strong, but were now balanced with ethical practices and community engagement that had earned the company recognition beyond the business press. As they reached the cafe, Rebecca paused, looking back at the bus stop where a simple act of kindness had altered the course of her life. "Something on your mind?" Marcus asked, noting her thoughtful expression. "Just thinking about that night," she said, "how a series of small mishaps led to something I never could have anticipated." Marcus smiled. "You mean getting stranded without bus fare?" "Meeting someone who would help me see beyond the narrow definitions of success I'd accepted for so long," Rebecca clarified. "Someone who offered kindness without calculation." "I just did what seemed right at the time," Marcus said, the same simple directness that had first drawn her to him still present despite all that had changed. "That's exactly it," Rebecca replied. "You did what was right, not what was expected or advantageous. You helped me remember what that feels like." As they entered the cafe, the barista greeted them by name, already preparing their usual orders. Rebecca noted the easy warmth of the interaction, so different from the deferential service she received in corporate settings where her title preceded her. "So," Marcus said as they settled at their favorite corner table, "bus fare well spent?" Rebecca laughed, reaching across the table to take his hand. "The best investment I've ever made." Outside, a city bus pulled up to the stop where they had first met, passengers boarding and alighting, most unaware of how a simple interaction in that unremarkable place had changed two lives irrevocably. Rebecca and Marcus exchanged a smile, both offering to pay for the coffee, a small ritual that had come to symbolize the balance they had found together. Two people from different worlds who had discovered, against all expectations, that the true value of connection transcended all conventional measures of worth.